do. All the things that we can do nutritionally and from a lifestyle medicine perspective to help us on this bumpy ride that is perimenopause and beyond. I'm very much a complementary practitioner. I work a lot with British menopause specialist GPs. I'm certainly not anti-HRT, and everything that I'm going to be talking about today is as relevant for those on HRT as for those that are choosing not to take HRT. The way I approach all of my kind of interventions that I'm going to talk about today is about the sort of the menopause toolkit, if you like, and how we can sort of dip in and take what we need. But I'm, as I say, I'm very much a complementary practitioner, not an alternative one. And I've been in clinic now for over 11 years and specializing in the menopause. So today, just a quick snapshot of what I'm going to be talking through, a little bit of biochemistry, a little bit of what's been going on for the last 440 months of our periods. And then I'm going to be looking at a few areas that have a big effect on how we are able to adapt to this kind of menopausal, perimenopausal journey. And perimenopause, as I'm sure most of you know, is a relatively new term, but it's the sort of the name given now to the lead up to menopause, which actually, you know, menopause is only one day. It's one day since, you know, not having a period for a year. So perimenopause is the time leading up to menopause, and then obviously post-menopause as well. And everything that I'm going to be talking about is very much for pre and post-menopause to help long-term vitality. So I'm going to be looking at stress, life load, what are the metabolic changes that are going on in our body at perimenopause. I'm going to be looking at the liver and the gut, which is so important when it comes to hormone balancing generally, even before perimenopause. And then I'm going to be looking at the psychological symptoms of perimenopause, which often manifest much before the physical symptoms. And actually this year's World Menopause Day tomorrow is the theme is cognition and mood. And then I'm going to be looking at sleep and the problems with sleep. And then I'm going to finish up on sort of some key menopause foods to include in your shopping list, as well as a quick sort of 101 on supplements and how to buy smart. And then I'm going to be looking at some common symptoms. So what has been going on every single month for years and years and years. For a lot of us, we've sort of forgotten what we learnt in GCSE or O-level biology. And this is just, I think it's really important for us to understand what has been going on, because this then shines a light really on the far-reaching effects really of estrogen and progesterone and why we can be a bit out of kilter. So on day one of your cycle, that's when we have our periods, that's when we menstruate. And this is stimulating a precursor to estrogen hormone called follicular stimulating hormone that comes from the pituitary, which is kind of behind our thyroid. And this is one of the hormones actually that you would be tested if you did get tested for menopause to see where you're at in menopause, because if FSH is really high, that can be because it's knocking on the door of our ovaries and the estrogen isn't being produced as much as it would have been pre-menopause. So FSH stimulates the release of estrogen from our ovaries. And in the first half of our cycle, that's when estrogen is the highest. And this is when we feel generally really strong. You know, estrogen is a steroid hormone. It makes us feel good. And it's also really related to our immune system as well. So we can also feel like, you know, we feel very strong physically at this time too, and less likely to sort of catch things. I would love the kind of the COVID, the Zoe app to be tracking where women were getting COVID that, 2 years ago when we were doing all that tracking. And I did write to them, but unfortunately they weren't tracking where in our cycle we were more likely to get estrogen, COVID. Anyway, so estrogen is actually is protecting the egg, and it's that's why it's related to our immune system. And this is why actually our immune systems are quite different from men's, because our immune system actually, as estrogen dips in the second half of our cycle, this is in order to let foreign invaders in, i.e. sperm, to come and procreate the egg at day 14 when we ovulate. And if, so our immune system isn't the same throughout the month because of these ebbs and flows of estrogen. So mid-cycle, we get a surge of testosterone, and this is when we feel great. We get our, our libido is really good, and this is all to prepare for, ovulation and for procreating the egg. We then get another precursor hormone called luteinizing hormone that's stimulated at ovulation, which then supports progesterone synthesis in the second half of our cycle. And progesterone is actually made from the sort of the empty sac after ovulation, after the egg has been released from the follicle, called the corpus luteum. And progesterone is often called our everything will be okay hormone. It's also called our period lightening hormone as well. And certainly at the start of perimenopause, one of the signs, even if we are still cycling on a 28-day cycle, is that we can be suffering with quite heavy periods. And this can be a sign of, reduced progesterone, but also hyper kind of more estrogen, because we actually get a bit of a hyperstimulation of estrogen at the start of perimenopause. I wanted to show really the sort of far-reaching effects of estrogen and progesterone. And I think for many of us starting, perimenopause can start, as early as our 40s, when suddenly we just feel really fatigued, or we start to get low mood, or we get anxiety out of nowhere, or sleep issues out of nowhere. And we quite often don't actually put them down to our hormones. We sort of think more of our hormones as being about PMS or, period crampings, etc. But estrogen and progesterone have receptors all over our body. And that includes our neurons, our neurons, our nervous system, as well as physically as well. So this is why we suffer so much with such far-reaching symptoms. I wanted to start today's session really talking about the effects of stress. And I often say to clients in clinic, I can't do anything about your external stress, but I can certainly help yourself internally, help your body adapt to stress better. Stress can be a positive force if we can adapt to it. And I think for a lot of us at this time, we do very much feel like the sort of the image on the left-hand side, where literally we sort of want to curl up in a ball. And burnout is real. We spend so much of our lives looking after everyone else except ourselves. I think even, my cat is above me on my to-do list. And that is something about being female. Men know when to sit down and rest or to go out and exercise. And I think women just find it very difficult. And we also have this thing about having to cope. Although that is changing, but we sort of tend to, as I say, look after everyone else except ourselves. And this is a time when actually it's really good, because we're sort of forced to look after ourselves. But actually biochemically, when we think about stress, it is actually, if we're in fight or flight mode, we are down regulating lots of other systems in the body. And one of those that's really important is our digestive function. Our bodies haven't changed much in 20,000 years, and they're having to really struggle with our modern day lifestyle that's really turbocharged. Even our brain is struggling to keep up with the amount of messages that we're having through our technology, etc. So for me, digestion is really important, because, as a nutritionist, it's always the first port of call for me with clients, because at the end of the day, however great your diet, if it's not actually being digested properly, if you're going for too many bowel movements, or, you're getting full quickly after eating, or just not feeling hungry, then it's a bit of a waste of time. But also stress can, affects lots of other areas in the body as well. It affects our brain. There's nothing more stressful to the brain than loads of stress. So what can we do about it? Well, as I say, aside from sort of running away to a desert island, which would be nice, I do think there is a lot of ways in the body that we can help reduce the need for so much stress hormone. The first thing to do is to prioritize some self-care. And even if this is the first hour of your day, this can have a really amazing ripple effect for the rest of the day. We're overwhelmed, we're struggling, and I'm very much a realist, and I'm very much about, small shifts that can have the biggest effect. On waking, if we have a cup of tea or coffee, we're basically putting ourselves into stress mode. Caffeine stimulates cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline, to stimulate glucose release, which is stored in our liver, glucose to be released, to zoom around our body, and the body thinks it's in fight or flight mode, which is why caffeine can be quite useful if we're trying to sort of keep, lots of, having to do lots of work, for example, or, having to stimulate our brain, get ourselves up and running. But actually what we're doing is we're just hanging off our hormones, and we're creating internal stress. So as I say, I can't do anything about the external stress, but I can help your body reduce the need for so much internal stress. And caffeine, if you drink too much caffeine on an empty stomach as well, you'll get jangly and you'll feel more stressed. So even if you wake up and you're feeling stressed and then you have more caffeine, you will feel more stressed. So what I recommend is actually just switching that around and having a hot water and lemon on waking, or a hot water with a slice of ginger on waking, because actually we're dehydrated when we wake up. And having this is very soothing. The lemon stimulates, a bitter, it stimulates the liver. The liver is in charge of so many functions in the body. It's a major multitasker, like us really. But that lemon will wake the liver up, because the liver is in charge of digesting fats, for example. And then to eat breakfast. So many of us don't eat breakfast. We'll just have a cup of tea or coffee, or a slice of toast with some jam on, and that's it. Whereas actually taking time for breakfast, and for some of us that are hybrid working now, we do have a bit more time to enjoy our breakfast. And ideally to have a protein-rich breakfast. The sort of the golden age of the English, the big English breakfast. But I've lived in Asia for 5 years, and I love the fact that you will eat the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's only in this country that we think, some very sweetened kind of packaged cereals that have been on the shelf for 2 years is somehow going to sustain us. And we wonder why at 10:30 we feel absolutely famished, because it's all refined carbohydrates that we're burning off. So eating a protein-rich breakfast, taking your supplements, if you take supplements, have them by the kettle so you can remember to take them, and enjoy your tea or coffee with your breakfast. So like alcohol, caffeine on an empty stomach will have a greater effect on your hormones, whereas actually having it with food lessens that effect of stimulating cortisol. At perimenopause, we have some big metabolic changes that are happening, which is why we suddenly get this often a sudden weight gain. And no amount of calorie countings or cardio in the gym is going to shift it, especially as it's round the waist. This is often called the worry waist as well. And as our estrogen starts to kind of roller coaster, it can affect the ratio with testosterone, which testosterone kind of stays, it doesn't roller coaster like estrogen and progesterone do. And this is when we can suddenly start to get a more male pattern of weight gain, which is around the middle. But also estrogen is very much involved in our insulin sensitivity. So it means that we are more sensitive to glucose and can sort of get it out of the blood really easily. Whereas at perimenopause, as estrogen dips, we become less able to deal with the amount of sugar that we're having in our diet, which is quite omnipresent in our diet. And remember, our bodies haven't changed much in 20,000 years. We never used to have this amount of sugar that we do now. And the brain finds that very difficult to deal with. So the brain has to keep blood glucose within those gray lines, within a very specific kind of parameter. If it goes too high, it will stimulate the storage hormone insulin. So if our blood sugar becomes more kind of unstable because of these dips of insulin, of estrogen, we're getting more insulin, which is more of the storage hormone, which means more weight gain. But also when we have these highs of sugar, we feel really great. We feel like loads of energy. And then this high stimulates loads of insulin release. And then we get a crash. We get a low of blood glucose. And actually, if you're suffering with anxiety or even things like OCD or mood swings, those lows in blood sugar are going to exacerbate that issue. And the lows in blood sugar then set off this stress cascade, which is the release of cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, to bring the blood sugar back up. This is how sort of tightly, sort of on this level that the blood sugar needs to be. I always say eating carbohydrates or any kind of refined sugar is basically like putting petrol onto our energy fire. The flames burn really bright, they kick off loads of heat, and then the fire goes really, really small. Whereas I see protein and good fats, those essential fatty acids, omega-6, omega-3, a little saturated fat, fine. But these fats and proteins are more like putting coal onto the fire. They give you a drip feed of energy. The coal releases more heat. And the more heat we get, the more satiety we get. But the coal also burns for longer. The flames aren't as bright, but they burn for longer. And this is why swapping out. So, I'm never about taking out sugar from our diet because that's not sustainable. It's all about crowding it out with more protein and more beneficial fats. And when we're dealing with stubborn weight gain, as I said, please don't calorie count, don't diet. Diets don't work. We go on an average of about 4 a year, and as soon as we come off them, the weight goes back on. As I say, we're up against these metabolic changes at perimenopause, which is why it's so frustrating if you go on a diet with your partner and they suddenly lose loads of weight. Is because, men have more testosterone, which is more anabolic, and, burns more fat. So we have these hormonal roadblocks. So what do we do? Well, for me, a big thing is moving from energy dense food. So you're more kind of breads and pasta and refined carbohydrates, high fat food or less helpful fats, and then moving to more nutrient dense food. So these are brightly colored fruits and vegetables and eggs and lean meat, and never to be without. For me, I do think that the diet industry sets women up to feel sets women up to fail, and also sets us up to feeling guilty and feeling like we're going without. And, at this stage, we are so overwhelmed and we're so fatigued. The last thing I want anyone to be feeling is then that they're not getting this joy from food. And actually, for a lot of my women, I want them to eat more. The amount of women I see in practice that literally don't eat the whole day or eat very little. They do loads of cardio at the gym and then they eat an evening meal, but they're not losing weight because their body isn't being fueled with these nutrients like vitamin C and B-vits, which help us to get loads of energy that then we want to move more and we feel good. So definitely not calorie counting. Fat is our friend. Our brain is 60% fat. We need fat to lose fat. All of these low fat diets, what do they have in them? They have loads of sugar. And the great thing is about fat is that it actually anchors your hunger, as opposed to then the sort of the low fat, high sugar, which basically means that we want to snack the whole time, which then means more weight gain. So only having caffeine with breakfast, eating your breakfast, and then enjoying protein at every meal and snack is really key. And that will actually mean that you won't need to snack so much. You can have these kind of mini fasts in between your meal times. And then looking at a 12 to 14 hour fast from the last time that you eat something in the evening, you can still have your water and your herbal teas. I mean, obviously, if you're diabetic, that's not something I'd recommend. But, for most of us, we can go 12 to 14 hours quite easily. And then this means that it gives the digestive system a full kind of reset. And then we're hungry for breakfast because so many of us aren't hungry for breakfast. And eating earlier as well in the evening will make you hungrier for breakfast as well. So everything to do with hormones is to do with the liver and the gut as well. These are incredibly important organs. And actually, the liver it has no pain receptors on it, so it's quite difficult to see if it's in need of some support. But some classic kind of sluggish liver signs are things like feeling very hungover quickly after alcohol, getting itchy skin, hives, feeling nauseous. The word bilious comes from the word bile, and bile is produced by the liver to emulsify fats and to digest fat. So if you're feeling quite so nauseous a lot of the time, especially after eating fatty foods, these are little signs that your liver could use some TLC. And actually, the liver produces something called sex hormone binding globulin, which keeps all of our hormones in check. We don't want all of these hormones zooming around the body unbound, because they can sort of unleash all their maybe too much of their sort of characteristics, if you like. So it's really important to have this sex hormone binding globulin. It's really important for our thyroid. T4, which is produced in the thyroid, comes to the liver to be converted into the more active form of T3. So, everything to do with our thyroid is to do with the liver as well. It's also really important to get excess estrogen out of the body. And actually, you'd think, we could always talk about sort of dips in estrogen at perimenopause, whereas actually we can get this sort of hyperstimulation of estrogen right at the start of our perimenopausal journey, as the body kind of wants to have one last ditch attempt at procreating. And actually signs of kind of excess estrogen are things like, widely in the medical literature, estrogen sensitive conditions such as fibroids and heavy periods and breast cysts and very sensitive breasts, and even, going to estrogen sensitive breast cancer. So we want to be making sure that we're getting excess estrogen out of the body effectively as well. And actually, the liver is, in Chinese traditional medicine, is seen as the organ of anger. So if you have got quite a lot of rage, we want to be making sure that everything is flowing through the liver. It's doing so many different jobs, but, detoxification, we need to be making sure everything's flowing well. So how do we support the liver? Well, that warm water and lemon will help wake the liver up. Fasting will help give the liver a break so it can get on with its other 400 plus, or nearly 500 plus jobs. Obviously reducing things like fried foods, etc. Most of my clients don't have loads of takeaways and loads of fried foods, and their diet isn't bad. It's just it's not as nutrient dense as it can be. The liver needs lots of B vitamins, which can be found in non-gluten grains and eggs and all the different cereals, and fish and lean meats, and then the bitter foods. We've kind of forgotten how to eat bitter foods. We don't eat bitter and we don't eat sour much anymore, and the liver loves these kind of bitter artichokes, dandelion, burdocks teas, etc. And the liver also loves brassicas. Brassicas have something in them called indole-3 carbinol, which helps to shunt estrogens, etc., through the liver and gets rid of them on the detox pathway. And then we come to look at your gut, and the gut is so important. It's for many reasons. It's very much involved in regulating our hormones. It has something in it called the estrobolome. It has an enzyme in there that if we're constipated, which many of us are, and interestingly, our gut is where we house all of nerve endings, i.e. sort of brain cells, outside of the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal column, are in the gut, which is why we get a gut feeling about something, and why we get butterflies in the stomach. Well, our stomach is much higher up, but butterflies in the stomach around the gut is because of all these nerve endings down there, which is why we get constipated if we're very anxious. Or, for many other reasons as well. But constipation can actually increase this enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, which then means that more estrogen is then recirculated back via the portal vein back to the liver, and then, giving the liver more work to do as well as toxins too. So we want to be making sure that we're supporting our guts. Everything to do, a lot of it to do with the brain. So if we're suffering with low mood, anxiety, is to do with the gut, and you help the gut and then you help the brain, because the gut and the brain are connected by this big trunk nerve called the vagus nerve. And there's a lot of kind of reasons why things like cold water swimming and singing and even gargling can help to stimulate the vagus nerve, which sort of shunts us away from fight or flight but into rest and digest mode, which is where I want everyone to be. We're too much in the fight or flight and too little in the rest and digest. So as I say, the psychological symptoms of perimenopause are often come way before the physical symptoms start. And they can be quite distressing for women, especially for those of us who have never suffered with it before. And they can really blindside us, because suddenly we're feeling really anxious, we're catastrophizing, we feel like a coiled spring, or even worse, we sort of feel we lose joy for the things that used to bring us joy. And I think that's that sort of feeling of low mood and, what is happening to me? Why am I feeling like this? And this can happen in our early 40s. And, for many of us, we're, it can really affect our family setup and our marriages, etc. So what I would say is with all of these areas of mental health, that there is much that can be done through food and lifestyle medicine, but obviously speak to your healthcare practitioners as well, and speak to them about HRT as well. There's a lot of press recently about a lot of women going to their GPs and actually being prescribed antidepressants, whereas actually HRT might have been a better option for them. And actually the NICE guidelines do state that now if you do present with depression, I think you have to be 45 or over, and you've never suffered with it before, then your GP practitioner should be able to prescribe you with or to think about menopause as well. Although I forget, I'm talking to all of you who work in the NHS, so you probably know that anyway. So from a nutritional perspective, it is about supporting the gut. The biggest thing that you can do to help your gut is to increase your plants. And this, I always start people off with 30. Variety is important too for the gut. Starting up with 30 different plants a week and working up to 40 and then 50. And these can be things like herbs and spices, and obviously fruit and veg, pulses, legumes, nuts and seeds, non-gluten grains. And actually, if you make lots of, I make a lot of Asian food, if you make lots of curries, if you make lots of ramens and things like that, you will already be getting loads of spices in there as well. So it's quite easy to get to those totals. But go slowly. If you haven't had a lot of plants for a while, and you suddenly start eating loads of them, that can cause bloating. So to go very, very slowly there. Omega-3 fats are incredibly important for our mental health. And actually, there is a stack of research on omega-3 fats and depression, even before perimenopause, so just depression generally. There's a great website actually called Food and Behavior Research that kind of pools a lot of these research into nutrients to help with our brain. So these are the best source of omega-3 fats are in oily fish, so the small fish, the things like smaller fish, trout, salmon, mackerel, sardines, tin sardines, pilchards, it doesn't have to be expensive. But also nuts and seeds. I mean, how similar does a walnut look to our brain, for example? And that has, an amazing amount of omega-3 in. I also really like linseed oil, but get fresh from, I buy mine from the linseed farm in Sussex. It's really fresh. And this can be kept in the fridge. And actually, linseed oil, alpha linoleic acid, as it's called, has a health claim, an EU health claim that a tablespoon a day can reduce cholesterol. So if you've got some high cholesterol there, that is also, to get an EU health claim is no mean feat. So there's lots of research on that. And then we're looking at things like key minerals like zinc and magnesium. So zinc is very much involved with combating anxiety. If we drink alcohol, for example, alcohol requires zinc to be detoxified out of the body, which is why alcohol, if you're suffering with anxiety, that can exacerbate the issue. Magnesium is nature's tranquilizer, as is calcium. Magnesium is found in green leafy vegetables, pulses, avocados, pumpkin seeds. Epsom bath salts, a really easy and not expensive way. I mean, I love to have a bath, and magnesium is absorbed through the skin. It's really great if you suffer with any PMS crampings, if you get mid-cycle migraines, or if you get twitchy leg at night as well. But also we need to be feeding the brain with lots of antioxidant-rich berries, actually. So things like plums and pomegranates and blueberries, don't mind if they're frozen, but all of this kind of dark, also green and white comes in here, but these are all full of flavonoids and other antioxidants that help quench free radicals and help our brain health. We also need good circulation to get to our, the brain takes a huge amount of oxygen in the body. So vitamin C is really important for our circulation. And the B vitamins, lots of studies on B vits as memory vitamins, because they're linked to acetylcholine, which is a neurochemical, which is all about memory and is actually indicated in Alzheimer's. And then we have rosemary for remembrance, for our memory. So all of these things really do help with these debilitating symptoms. And then we come on to sleep. There was this recent study that came out in the UK press about how women going through perimenopause actually suffer with 5 weeks less sleep a year to men and to those not going through perimenopause. I mean, this is over a month less sleep that we're having. There's a massive issue with sleep inequality. And for me, this is why, I work in this field. Menopause is a women's rights issue. We need to be helping women through this journey. And it's amazing that, companies are now, helping support their, over 45 female workforce, because if you come into work exhausted and, it's incredibly difficult to keep performing as we want to perform. And this is why a lot of women are leaving the workplace. We do lead a very sort of male pattern of life, and we have to work very hard if we choose to sort of peel off to have children, and we're coming back, and then suddenly perimenopause hits and we're up against this. So there are reasons why estrogen is linked to our happiness neurochemicals. So that's why we start to get low mood, because serotonin is all about happiness. But serotonin then goes on to make melatonin, which is the Dracula hormone that comes out at night to help us sleep. And then links with progesterone is linked to another calming neurochemical called GABA. And that's why progesterone is also called our anti-anxiety hormone, because of GABA. But GABA actually gets us in, we need GABA to be able to get into a light sleep. We have like 4 stages of sleep, and the GABA helps us get into light sleep. Then we have 2 deep sleeps, and then we have our REM sleep, which is when we have rapid eye movement, and that's when we're more likely to dream. It's our creative time of our sleep. We are supposed to have gaps in between each sleep cycle. We're not supposed to be dead to the world for 8 hours, because our body is 20,000 years old, and this wouldn't have been very good for our survival if we were sort of out. So we are supposed to still have little waking bits, but as long as you can get back to sleep. But most women can't, find that difficult. And then we also come up against night sweats, anxiety, aches and pains, as well as frequent loo stops that all exacerbate insomnia. So what can we do about it? I could talk about sleep for hours, but for today's session, my main thing is that tomorrow starts today. Everything that we're eating, everything that's going in here, our lifestyle is affecting how well we sleep, which is affecting how well we function tomorrow. So all the things that I've said before about starting with a protein-rich breakfast, caffeine, if you're having lots of caffeine, that is likely to be an easy win for you, because it often affects our sleep. So keeping caffeine limited to our breakfast, have 1 or 2 cups, be mindful, enjoy it. Vitamin D is really important for SAD syndrome, for anyone suffering with SAD, but it's really important to help melatonin synthesis, which is why, if you've been outside a lot, on a sunny day, and you've caught the sun a bit, you will sleep much better, because you will be getting more melatonin and this sort of serotonin. So with protein, there are 8 essential amino acids that we have to get from our diet, which is why protein is just so important. And for many of us, we're not getting enough protein. Tryptophan is one of those. So, tryptophan goes on to make serotonin and melatonin. So it's really important for not only happiness, but also our sleep. We are one big chemical reaction in our body. And actually, from a nutritionist perspective, if we haven't got all the sort of the amino acids or the other vitamins and minerals, then we will still go, but we won't go as effectively. So I'm all about trying to give the body as much nutrients as it can to go as best as it can. And then also to be aware of some foods that are high in tyramine and histamine, which can actually stimulate adrenaline and noradrenaline. And they can actually increase our heart rate and stop us from sleeping very well. And these include things like cured meats, chocolate, red wine, cheese. We all kind of know, don't we, that if we've had those, we won't sleep as well. And that's the reason. If you tend to wake in the night a lot, this can be to do with lows in blood sugar. As I said before, if we get that low in blood glucose in the night, we can, it stimulates then the stress hormones to bring the blood glucose back up, but it also wakes us up at the same time. Alcohol, for example, is liquid sugar. And this is why, if you're, for a lot of us, we're using alcohol to get to sleep, but then we're waking up in the night, because alcohol can cause that dip in blood sugar, but it's also shunts us into a very deep sleep, and then we're out of cycle because we haven't done the sort of the other bits of sleep to get to that deep sleep, and then we wake up and we don't know where we are. Magnesium is so important. That will really help. No phones or technology in the bedroom. Even if you've got your phone by your bed and it's on airplane mode, you're still thinking about what's on your phone. Our whole life is on our phone. So I tend to advise people to get all of that out of the bedroom. And actually all of those apps that if you wake up and, you know, you then go on the app and then that sort of wakes you up even more. I like to have a journal by the bed. So if you wake up with a busy head, you can just write everything down, which helps. And then these are some key menopause foods that I recommend. And as I say, you know, the brassicas to help our liver detoxify excess hormones and get them out of the body. The ground linseed, a really amazing source of lignans, which is a phytoestrogen. And phytoestrogens, along with the tofu, they're not estrogens, but they have an estrogen-like effect on the body. And these can really help with the sort of the roller coasters as we come into perimenopause. And they're a great source of protein. Ground linseed is a great source of omega-3. Tofu is a great source of calcium as well. You know, there's no such thing as a vitamin C tree. That's what I like to think of it. And foods can give us so many things. You know, the hot water and lemon, the omega-3s, the zinc, the magnesium, the B6, which is so important for progesterone synthesis, the bitter foods. Really important. I've actually got on this free whisk.com, whisk as in the whisk, and I've loaded up, I've got 3 community pages there where I've gleaned all the recipes that I find online, and there's some natural menopause recipes there, but I also have some on-the-go lunches and some easy low bandwidth dinners on there. So you can have a look at those recipes. And then coming on to supplements, so not all supplements are made equal, and some supplements do give other supplement brands a bit of a bad name. My rule of thumb is not to buy supplements from the supermarket because they're often in the wrong format. And what I mean by that is, for example, they're in formats that are less bioavailable to the body, and things such as, for example, magnesium oxide and zinc oxide. So have a look on your multi when you get home. These are not as bioavailable. They're very cheap, but they're not as well absorbed in the body as something like magnesium sulfate or magnesium citrate, zinc picolate. Also zinc, magnesium glycinate and magnesium taurate. They're much better absorbability, and as you know, they will be in supplement companies that, you know, it might cost you a bit more, but at the end of the day, they're actually being absorbed. I would also recommend things like calcium carbonate. Unfortunately, is you need a lot of stomach acid to be able to absorb calcium carbonate. Again, very cheap kind of form of calcium. And for most of us, our digestive function is a bit under par. So I recommend calcium citrate instead of carbonate. Vitamin D, make sure you're getting D3, that it's been emulsified as well in a dropper, I recommend, because then that's already been partly fat digested. Vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. And I also recommend, if you don't like oily fish, you know, supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids is great. Although, you know, please, if you're on any medication, please speak to your healthcare provider, because there are contraindications with a lot of these herbs and supplements. So just quickly, just 3 troubleshooting areas. Hot flushes is one of the commonest symptoms suffered out of about 80% of us. And the reason being is that when we get a dip in estrogen, this can affect our body temperature because estrogen is involved in that as well. And then suddenly the body thinks, oh, I need to reduce my temperature. And then it stimulates adrenaline and noradrenaline, which will then vasodilate our skin and our sweat glands. And there is a really good link here with the blood sugar that I was talking about, because if we have that lower blood glucose, adrenaline and noradrenaline are being stimulated and they're vasodilatory. So one of the common triggers to hot flushes is actually blood sugar lows. And if you can balance your blood sugar, that should really help your hot flushes. Other common triggers are things like hot drinks, but usually caffeine. And again, if you have your caffeine with your breakfast, that will reduce that hot flush. Quite often, if you're waking up and having a tea or coffee, you will get a hot flush because it has more of a stress effect. It's increasing that adrenaline and noradrenaline. That's why stress can also trigger hot flushes for that reason too. And then we have alcohol, sulfites, MSG, sugar, chocolate as well, all common triggers. But also some really healthful foods like ginger, turmeric, and beetroot can be too warming for some of us too. So I recommend phytoestrogens. As I say, these are not estrogens. They have a mild estrogen-like effect, and they don't build up in the body like xenoestrogens, which are much more toxic for us. Phytoestrogens are also in such a broad amount of foods, not only the soya family, and we're talking lignans as well, like the ground linseed, but they're also in brassicas and pulses and alfalfa and all of these different foods that, they're quite omnipresent in a lot of our plants that are very helpful for us. Vitamin E, so evening primrose oil, a brilliant remedy for hot flushes. And evening primrose oil has sort of come a bit out of favor, hasn't it? It's not quite so much in fashion at the moment, but, a really simple and cheap kind of supplement that you can take. And then vitamin C. And then we come on to the herbs, the black kirsch, the donkoy, the sage. Sage is really good. You can get some really nice sage supplements there from A. Vogel. Sage support herbal medicine there. But obviously, please, if you're on any medication, you need to speak to someone first, your healthcare provider. And then we have cooling foods. If you have a celery juice every day, that will make you feel cold. And I had a client recently who was so cold, but she was having celery juice all the time. I was just like, it's really cooling. So these are other foods that you can increase. And then just briefly, aches and pains. So estrogen is involved in our immune system. As I said at the start, it's protecting that egg in the first half of our cycle, and then it dips in our second half of our cycle. And with aches and pains, estrogen is actually our anti-inflammatory, and this is why actually perimenopause is shown as a inflammatory event in our lives, because of these dips in estrogen. So phytoestrogens will help here, but also anti-inflammatory foods. We are so much more sort of inflammatory than anti-inflammatory. So omega-3 fats are very anti-inflammatory. Things like turmeric and ginger, really potent anti-inflammatories. So these are all things that can help here. Also more protein, more collagen, osteoarthritis, we need more antioxidants, but quite often the omega-3s as well will really help here. And then just quickly on to skin food. We are losing about 30% of our collagen at perimenopause. So this is why, I recommend more protein with vitamin C. So we need vitamin C to help collagen synthesis. And if you do like roast chickens, you can boil up your bones in a pressure cooker. It doesn't need to take long. And this gives us a lovely collagenous broth that we can use for things like soups and ramens and other Asian soups. Zinc and vitamin C are really important here, and drinking more hydration, and omega-3 oils will really help if you're getting bobbles on the backs of the arms or cracked heels. And yeah, if you're having water, when you're drinking water, just be mindful of drinking it away from meal times, because quite often we're sort of downing a pint of water at our meal because we've forgotten to drink, and we're basically putting out our stomach acid fire, and then are sort of expecting us to be able to sort of absorb a big meal. And then just finally, a little bit on intimate ecology. Our vaginal microbiome changes at perimenopause, which is why suddenly we can start to feel like we're getting more thrush, or we're getting more UTIs, or we can be suffering with painful sex. And because the vaginal microbe should be quite acidic. And as estrogen dips, it can become more alkaline. There are some amazing supplements out there that focus on the vaginal microbiome, but there are things that you can do as well. So probiotics are one. Things like antihistamines, alcohol, caffeine, diuretics, they're all quite drying. Having more vitamin E in your diet, so the evening primrose oil will help, but also the omega-3s and vitamin C. Omega-3s help to sort of plump up the labia to help not make sex painful. And obviously there's some really good lubricants out there that are without parabens, and not to be having ones with parabens. So yes are the ones that we can get from our pharmacy, and Hanks is another one as well. So yeah, lots of things to consider. So I hope I'm to time. Ready for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. I know I took a lot from that, definitely, especially on gut health. We'll go to the, I know we've got a couple of hands up. Just go to the chat box first. So somebody's asked, can you advise what the best treatment use is for constipation during menopause?
Yes. So constipation is really, really common. So my biggest thing is magnesium. So magnesium helps to support all the smooth muscles in the body, of which the uterus muscle is one, which why it helps with PMS cramping, but the gut is another one. So we need to be helping with peristalsis. So either Epsom bath salts, or you can take a magnesium supplement, but obviously food always first. So that's why green leafy vegetables will just be so great for you anyway on lots of different levels, but also vitamin C rich foods as well to help with constipation. So if you do have a juicer, to make vegetable juices, even sort of carrot, beetroot and ginger juice, carrots are still quite high in sugar when you juice them, but if you juice them yourself and have them with breakfast, that also gives your body a massive micronutrient hit, and especially vitamin C. We don't store vitamin C very effectively, so we do need it daily. But also things like the ground linseed that I was talking about. Not only is this a wonderful phytoestrogen, it actually, if you have a little bit of water with it at breakfast, not a lot of water, but a little bit, it actually forms a mucilage and massages the gut on the way down. So that's a really good one. And then just to allow yourself to have these breaks in between meals, so that when I'm working on constipation, we have to sort of work further up the gastrointestinal tract. We have to be making sure that we're chewing our food well, and we have to make sure that our stomach acid is high enough in order to process the food coming in, because if we don't have high stomach acid, the food then lands in the gut undigested, and the gut's like, I don't understand that, and causes bloating, causes an immune response. And that's when we can sort of get impacted stools as well. So yeah, that will definitely help. The ground linseed is great. It's a bit like psyllium husk, but it's much more useful for us at perimenopause because of the phytoestrogens.
That's great. Thanks, Karen. We're getting questions thick and fast now.
Okay.
So next one is, what are your thoughts on CBD oil?
I don't know that much about it, so I wouldn't be able to comment that much. I mean, people do feel, there's lots of great products out there now, but for me, when I'm thinking about anxiety and when I'm thinking about sleeplessness, I sort of focus in on the food and some supplements as opposed to the CBD. It's a bit out of my area, I would say, but people have had good results with it, but I wouldn't be able to comment further than
that. Next one, what would you recommend the dose for vitamin D be?
Yeah, so the NHS, as you all know, I'm sure, is 400 IU a day, and actually that's the big thing that's changed since COVID, that it's now all year, isn't it? Whereas it used to just be in the winter months. I personally, you can test, don't guess, but with vitamin D, and with us coming into winter again, with COVID rearing its head, vitamin D has had so much research done on respiratory distress and just as an viral. So I personally would look to like 1,000 IU a day. I think is a good base level without testing, because especially if you have darker skin, and we're not going out in the sun as much, which is obviously because of skin cancer. We're often our products have SPF in as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I recommend. And as I say, to get it in a dropper, you can get really good droppers from companies like BioCare, for example. I don't work for any of these companies, but you can just get 1 drop a day, and actually in good multivitamins and minerals, you should be able, it's usually around 1,000 IU a day on most of the higher potency ones.
Brilliant. Another one. Any further recommendations for foods for an underactive thyroid?
So the thing with the thyroid is with anyone with a low thyroid, and actually loads of patients of mine get test results back and they're sort of fine, but there's still, you know, big thyroid kind of picture there. You have to work on your stress load first, your adrenal health. And our adrenals are little glands that sit on top of the kidneys, and they kick out all the stress hormones, as I've been talking about. But if we're really, really stressed, this can actually down-regulate the thyroid, because the body's like, oh, I can't deal with that higher metabolic rate. So it's important to work on that life load first, and the blood sugar balancing and things like that will all reduce the body's need to kick out so much cortisol. So when it comes to the thyroid, protein is really important. And it's interesting, you know, a really important protein for the thyroid is tyrosine. And actually tyrosine is a precursor, is a protein that's also needed for adrenaline and noradrenaline. So you can see why, you know, if we're really, really stressed, the thyroid suffers. Obviously, things like selenium will help our thyroid, iodine, and, you know, a little bit of seaweed. But for me, it's more about sort of protein-rich foods and getting those green leafy vegetables in as well. There's some really lovely thyroid supplements out there as well. You know, BioNutri, for example, does one. But if you are on thyroxine, then you wouldn't be able to. You wouldn't take them if you're on thyroxine, but there are some nice subs out there with some nice herbs in. But obviously you're more than welcome to email me afterwards if you want, and then I can do a contraindication check if you're on any other meds.
Brilliant. No, thank you. I'm not sure we're going to get through all the questions, but we'll try and get through as many as we can. How much of evening primrose oil should you take a day?
So most of the evening primrose oil, I'm just thinking of BioCare's one, which is just 1 capsule a day, and most of them just follow on what's on the pack, but usually it's just a little capsule. And I can't tell you how much it can really help with. It's just very calming and anxiety. You could see why it was the kind of go-to women's health supplement for the change, you know, 10, 20 years ago. But all I would say is that if you are taking an omega-3 supplement as well, just to take them at different times, because they do compete for binding sites. So on the cell or in digestion. So it's good to take them at separate times.
Brilliant. The question about soya, is it safe to take as a supplement? Interesting
question. So there are some really good isoflavone supplements out there. But when I speak to the supplement companies, they basically say they're fine to take if you're on HRT. But they're not to be taken if you're on birth control, which actually, you know, because it can affect birth control, and also not to be taken if you have had breast cancer or have estrogen sensitive breast cancer. And it's largely because they're not, you know, they are from food states, but they're just erring on the side of caution. But that's why phytoestrogens from food, you know, there's so much research out there on, you know, how supportive they are and how protective they are, because they help us when we have lows in estrogen, but they also help us if we have really high estrogen, because they combine for receptor sites, estrogen receptor sites, and actually block the more aggressive forms or the more proliferative forms of estrogen. So it's an interesting area of research. There's a lot of, not controversy, but there's a lot of discussion about it in the literature. But and I think that's why supplement companies are very wary of that in terms of if you are a breast cancer survivor. So other than that, then yes. And again, A. Vogel does a nice one. And they're, you know, isoflavones are in a lot of the kind of the menopause supplements as well. Yeah, things like red clover as well in a supplement.
Brilliant. I think we'll have this as the last question. What I'll do is try to take the other questions down, and maybe potentially Karen will be lovely enough to answer what she can. But we know this, we're just going a little bit over time. But somebody's asked, she needs assistance with libido. It's taken a massive effect on her relationship with her husband. Is there anything you can recommend?
Yeah. When I do presentations with my GP menopause specialist, she has one of them has this brilliant kind of slide, which is basically a machine, and at the top there's loads and loads of different buttons, and then on the bottom there's just one button. And she talks about the top bit being women when it comes to libido, and the bottom bit being about men. And I do that they're just on off. And I do think it has a really big effect on relationships, and this is why it's so important that we're talking about it, so you can talk to your partner about it. You might not want to have sex, we don't want to have sex with anyone else, but I think for men, they find it really difficult because they haven't changed much since they were 19. And the problem is with libido, there are lots of different factors involved, and one of them is fatigue. If you're exhausted, that's the last thing on your list. So things that can really help with libido are, interestingly, magnesium has been researched with helping with libido. And that kind of makes sense to me because magnesium is so incredibly important for our energy and anti-anxiety. So it helps us kind of physically and mentally. Things like ground maca have been shown, that maca root, always by organic though, has been shown to help with libido. But for me, it's really looking back at how tired are you, how have you been sleeping, that kind of thing. Also, lots of weight around the middle. If we get that sudden weight gain around the middle, that's kind of what's called brown fat. It's different from the fat that we have on our arms and on our thighs and on our butts, which is inert fat. And this fat around the middle, the more that we have, the more this can actually, by an enzyme called aromatase, can actually shunt the testosterone in our fat cells to more estrogen. So we can actually lose testosterone that way. But it's a funny one because also at perimenopause, we can get get a dominance of estrogen, which means the sort of the facial hair, the acne and the male pattern baldness. It's a joy, isn't it, womanhood? You can also talk to your GP about libido, and I know that libido is something that you can get you try testosterone for, but there are. I write about it in the book. There are things that you can do naturopathically for libido as well, but sorting out your tiredness is a big one.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. And I know we've got loads of messages and still coming through, but we're going to wrap things up now. But thank you so much for joining today, and thank you everybody for joining today. If you haven't already booked on any sessions throughout the week, have a look on Bookwhen. And I'll pop the link into the chat session. But I know everybody has really enjoyed your session today, Karen. Lots of questions coming through, and we'll try and get through what we can try and break them down after the session. Thanks again, everybody, for joining, and we will hopefully see you all throughout the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye.